Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Hope you enjoyed my intro animation thing. I will be actually, yeah, I'm talking about that now. That's my first thing. That took a little while to make. I wanna actually go back over to it because I haven't put my camera on here because I won't need it later on. But this took a while, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. Getting this animation working was, yeah, a bit of a pain, but I think it looks really nice. And I have now a .mov file that I can put wherever I want of Jogglebot doing this like back and forth juggling pattern. Um, yeah, with the transparent background, so it can be on top of anything, and it's really nice, very clean. I'm a big fan. And yes, big thank you to Jean-Marc, who has just commented, and yeah, he was very helpful with getting this working. I spent too long trying to get that to work, and yeah, I figure like I don't know. It might be a good idea. I'll give like a brief summary of what I did, just so that if anyone else is interested in making a similar sort of animation, they can see the process that I took. But the general idea was, ideally, we could use SolidWorks and set up. There's a thing called a mate connector in SolidWorks where you can control a bunch of mates at the same time, and you can say, in this position, you mate are here. You mate, like mate 1 is at this value, mate 2 is at this value, mate 3 is at this value, and so on. And so I went through and set up like 15 or 20 or so different positions and all of the different values that the mate connector had to be at. And my hope was that I could just flick through those positions and save the file as a PNG with a transparent background. I would lock my view in a specific spot so that way the camera didn't move, and everything would be easy. I would have all of these frames with a transparent background, and then I can just use like FFmpeg or whatever encoded process I want to just like stitch all of these frames together, and then I would have a nice, easy animation of Jogglebot juggling with a transparent background, because I want to be able to move this onto different things. But pretty much everything involved in that process, on SolidWorks at least, did not work. The mate connectors completely screwed up, and I actually have a really funny video. I think it's worth showing. It's pretty hilarious to see what happened when I tried to, when I first got this going. Let's see this one. Let me swap over to here. So this is what SolidWorks originally spat out when this was right at the beginning when I tried a proper like simulation, and like what is going on there? Like half of the bearings just start moving, and then the whole thing just like freaks out, and it's just like did not work. SolidWorks is not made for this sort of animation. Even the saving the image with a transparent background didn't work. That would just make the entire image black for some reason. So like, so many things just did not work in SolidWorks. So what I ended up having to do was to set my background in SolidWorks as a nice cyan color, which it didn't really matter what it was as long as it was sufficiently different from every other color in Jogglebot. So I just picked this like really bright cyan, and then I manually moved Jogglebot into all of its different positions, including moving the ball, which was, I'm surprised it actually looks as smooth as it does, because I just like picked spots for the ball that I'm like, yeah, this feels like it should be a good height given how far through the animation we are. Like, it's a miracle that it is as smooth as it is. So I saved all the frames with a cyan background, and then went into FFmpeg and removed the background, saved the frames with the transparent background, and then stitched them all together. And throughout this process, there were numerous times when the cyan background just like kept reappearing. Like I would remove it from the thing, so the picture would have transparent background, but then when I would stitch a bunch of these pictures together, the cyan background magically appeared again. I don't really know. I think the alpha channel was being a bit funny there. I don't know. It was a mess. It took a while, but it worked, and it looks really nice, in my opinion. So yeah, if you're going through something similar, expect to budget a fair amount of time if you're using SolidWorks to do this. I am pretty keen to get more into, like, to move the project over into Onshape and to see how Onshape handles this sort of thing differently to SolidWorks. I hope that it's better. I hope that it's a bit easier to make these sorts of animations. but we'll see. Ultimately, I think Blender is the way to do this. I've seen some really, really crisp animations that people have, like mechanical animations that people have made in Blender. So I think that's the real way to do it, but I don't know how to use Blender, so I don't know. I was really hoping this would only take like an afternoon, but it ended up being like 2 days. But I think it's worth it. So now I've got this GIF and we're all good. Such a mess. Anyway, let's get on to this week's content. So this week I've been doing a lot of simulating because as we remember from last week, I have just recently learned what a Jacobian actually is, and I really, really like them. Jacobians are extremely useful for analyzing mechanical systems like Jogglebot and assessing how good they are at being in different positions. And I'll elaborate on all of that soon. But first off, I want to just point out that I actually misremembered what my previous result, like what my previous analysis told me. So this is literally my second YouTube video. I was describing the process that I then went through to analyze the Stewart platform to try to see what geometry would be best for Jogglebot. And this is the result that I got. So if I get rid of my camera, we can see, like, we basically just want a high reach rate. So what this test was basically doing was changing the platform angle, changing a base angle, and changing the relative radii of the two, like the platform and the base. And then we would move the platform to a crap load of different positions, keeping it completely horizontal as well. There was no orientation at all in this, which I'll come back to in a little bit. But yeah, it just moved the platform to a whole bunch of these different positions. And then for each geometry combination, it saved how many of the total number of positions it was able to reach. Where it's unable to reach a given position if any of the legs connecting the platform to the base were either too long or too short or too angled, because like we don't want it to be leaning over too far. And this was the result that I got. So this is basically telling us that we want the base to be 60 degrees, the platform to be 60 degrees, and it's kind of hard to tell, but this has the two radii being the same. And what this ends up with is a platform that basically looks like the base, and the top bit and all of the legs are completely vertical. And as I showed in that video, I'll pull this down so you can see, I actually made this this platform, and I swear I was at the right spot. I've muted the audio here, by the way. But yeah, this is what we end up with. It is very clearly a bit crap. Definitely not what we want. And I gave some like airy-fairy explanation for why this gave a incorrect result. Incorrect being like, it's not really what we wanted. But because I didn't understand what Jacobians were, I couldn't really give a very thorough explanation of that. But now I do understand them, and now I can. And we'll get back to this geometry in a bit. But yeah, this is clearly wrong. Like, we clearly don't want all the legs to be perfectly vertical, but where do we want them? So, how do we do the new simulation? Well, we need to make sure that we include poses, like orientations this time, because orientations are going to be important for Jogglebot's actual operation. So those are critical. And using... Actually, yeah, I'll get to the Jacobian stuff in a bit. But so what I did is last week I showed how I made this basically like cylinder of pose combinations, but I've refined that a little bit. So now it's actually a cone. So if we trace out like the shape that this follows, this is going to be roughly conical. And I've made sure that these fit inside the workspace of the current robot. Just because I figure like that's a pretty good space for it to work inside, and it just feels like a large enough volume that we can subsume all of the positions that we really actually care about, but it's not so large that we're going to have a shitload of missed like points that the platform can't reach at all. I want to try to keep the reach rate as high as possible because I don't want to be simulating points that none of the platforms can reach, because that's just wasted time. And this simulation, I'll just as a bit of a spoiler, is so much faster than the one that I did before. The last one that gave this result was like a day or two. And now running this, even with like a lot of points, running this was like 5 hours, I think was the one last night. But yeah, so all of these points fit inside the workspace of the current robot. Keeping in mind that this workspace, this like black volume that's kind of around all of the points, was created using the old approach where I was only looking at the reach rate. So like whether the platform can be at that position with the platform fully flat without any of the legs breaking their geometry limits. And yeah, so that doesn't include any orientations at all. So keep that in mind because I'll be coming back to that. So the general idea is that we have all of these poses here where, can I zoom in? Sometimes I can zoom in, sometimes I can't. We have all of these poses, it's kind of hard to see there, but all of these red lines are actually arrows and the blue dots are positions. And the idea is that we move the platform to the blue dot, where like the center of the platform is at the blue dot, and then we angle it so that it's pointing in the direction of the arrow. Most of these arrows are pointing straight up. About half of them are pointing straight up, half of them are pointing in at 15 degrees. I previously had this last week at 30 degrees, but someone pointed out that 30 degrees is extremely steep, and in hindsight, yes, it is, because if Jugglebot is going to be juggling to itself, it's never going to be needing to tilt at 30 degrees. That's extremely steep. 15 degrees is also still fairly steep, but it's not, I think it's within the realm of possibility for Jugglebot juggling to itself. So yeah, I just had it as 15. Yeah, so we move the platform to the blue dot, angle it in the direction of the red arrow, and then we check a couple things. First thing, we check if the platform can actually be there in the first place without any of the legs breaking their geometry limits. If none of those limits are broken and the platform can be there without problems, then we start forming a score of how good the platform is at being in that position. So how stable it is, how controllable it is, and how easy it will be for us to move into and out of that position. And this is where the Jacobian comes in. So the question is, how do we score each pose? And I have 4 approaches for this. The first is a rank deficiency. And if you don't understand what this means, neither did I 2 weeks ago. It doesn't really matter too much. I'll be explaining the end effect of these in hopefully terms that are understandable. This rank deficiency approach, or the score, checks for a singularity, where a singularity is where we cannot move in a given direction anymore. So similar to the platform that we saw before that I made that had all of the legs like perfectly straight up and down, that is a singular position because it can't move. If we want to tell that platform to just move sideways, it can't do that. It does not have the capacity to do that. No matter where, what combination of legs it moves, the whole thing's just going to fall over. It cannot move to the side. And the fact that it cannot move in that direction comes up in the Jacobian. So this is an example of a full rank Jacobian. This is an example of a singular Jacobian. In fact, this is the Jacobian for that orientation where all of the legs are straight up and down. And if even at a glance, even like with very little familiarity with matrices, you can clearly see that something is wrong with this. And in particular, what this rank deficiency method is doing is it's checking for linear independence of all of these columns, which is basically to say, if we can construct this column or any of these columns with some combination of all of the other columns, then that column doesn't need to exist. It's just saying the same information again. And here we can clearly see that like this column, the second column, can very easily be reproduced with this column because it's in fact the same thing. And same thing with the last one. Like this is very rank deficient. Whereas this one, it's a lot harder to see. Like I can't, you would have to be very, very good at math and matrices to be able to just see if it's rank deficient. Normally, like you will go through a whole process of like row reducing and all that. That's not my problem. That's NumPy can, my code can do this for me. But the end result is that none of these columns can be reconstructed with any combination of any of the other columns. So this is fully linearly independent. All of these columns give us unique, useful information. So yeah, we check for if we have lost rank. And losing rank is really bad because that means that if we get into that position, we're stuck. Well, we're not necessarily stuck, but like we won't be able to move out of it in all directions, which is not ideal. We're going to have to like move out kind of in like the same way that we came. It's not good. We don't want to be rank deficient. That's bad. So we're checking for that. And then we're also checking the second approach is checking the condition number, which if you're not familiar with, I don't really want to go into the details because I don't fully understand it, but it's basically a way of checking the symmetry of the entire matrix. So, but yeah, the end result here is that a high condition number means that the platform is very sensitive to input errors. So if one of the legs is off by like a couple millimeters, then the whole thing might be off by like 20 millimeters. And we want to make sure that the entire platform is relatively not sensitive to input errors, because I'm expecting the legs to potentially have a bit of error in exactly how long they are. And it would be really nice if that error doesn't lead to a huge displacement of the platform. Like we really want we want them to be well controlled. A high condition number also indicates proximity to a singularity, which, as we just talked about, is a really bad thing. We don't want to have that happen. So yeah, that's doing the condition number of the entire Jacobian. But really for me, like if this is an example of a Jacobian that we might actually use. This is actually an example of the Jacobian for the platform as it is currently set up. Yeah, we don't really care about the third column and the sixth column, because if you remember from last week, these relate to the X, Y, Z translations and the alpha, or let's call them roll, pitch, and yaw. Roll, pitch, yaw. Sorry. Yeah, and we don't really care about the Z translation or the yaw, because yaw is like this direction, this sort of rotation. Jugglerbot's never going to need to do that. The ball is a sphere. It doesn't care how that is oriented. And the Z position, we may care about later, but for now, the plan is just to get the whole platform to move side to side, and the hand will do the up and down. So for now, we don't really care about that. And even later, I'm not too worried about the up and down positioning. So with that in mind, with that in mind, I have made a second form of the condition number that only checks the submatrix that we care about. So it takes the XY columns, it will look at these, and it will look at these, and it will create the condition number for those. So it's kind of like this, the symmetry of those two pairs. And then the fourth score is one that I came up with myself because, I don't know, I didn't really understand the condition number well enough to want to fully rely on it. So I came up with one myself, which is a ratio of the translation to the orientation column norms. Big sentence, doesn't really matter too much, but the end result here is that we take our X, Y, and our roll pitch. We want these four columns to be as close to each other as possible. Ideally, they are all, I mean, not exactly ones, but like a linear independent version of ones. We want them to be very, very similar. So what this fourth score is doing is it takes the average or the vector, the norm of each of these columns, and then it will average out the translation ones, and then average out the rotation ones, and then compare those. And we really want those, like that ratio to be 1. We want the platform to be as responsive to rotations as it is to translations. And that's what I'm trying to get that score to do. If that's wrong, if there's a big problem with this, let me know if you can see that. But that seems fine to me. That seems like a legit way to do things. And yes, this is basically like a kind of symmetry between translation and orientation. So how readily can the platform rotate versus translate? And we want these to be, pretty close so that it can rotate just as accurately and precisely as it can translate. Okay, so I put all those together. They're all in like a nice, easy function, and everything was working. But it's good to validate the simulation just to make sure that everything is actually doing what we want it to. And one of the forms of validation that I did here was to test the existing geometry. And I can show you what that looks like here. Let me just make sure this is set up correctly. Yes, yes, yes. So once this opens, here is our current geometry. So this is the platform radius is 240 millimeters. I think it's actually like 245 or something, but it's close enough. And the angle is 12 degrees. So that angle is the angle in between these two magenta nodes here. But we can see there are some unreachable poses, which we shouldn't have because I made sure that those poses are inside the workspace of the current platform. But if you remember, that workspace that we first created, that big black volume that was like around all of the poses, that didn't consider orientation at all. It only looked at the position. And we can see, this is super laggy, and I'll talk about this more in a bit, but it's very, very frustratingly laggy. But if we zoom in, eventually, we can see that all of the unreachable poses, which I have colored as little black dots, are actually poses where the platform is angled in. So we can see all of these poses have all of these positions have two orientations on them. There's a vertical one and a tilted in one. And so we can see that on all of the points where there's a black dot, there's an arrow pointing straight up, which means that the platform can reach that point in its vertical orientation, but there's no arrow pointing in, which is why there's a black dot there, which is saying that the platform cannot reach that pose where it's tilting inwards. So even with, yeah, I'll be very, very curious to rerun that like original workspace simulation to get what that workspace is, if we're including orientations that Jugglebot would actually care about. I think that workspace would be a lot smaller. Yeah, so I found that interesting that there are unreachable poses, even like very clearly inside that workspace at a relatively minor angle as well, at only 15 degrees. Yeah, I guess it's probably worth talking now about as well about what this is actually showing. So the arrows here are all of the different poses, and they are colored according to the condition number that the platform has at that pose, where a higher condition number is bad. We want as low a condition number as possible. And as we move this around, we can kind of see it's kind of hard to tell right now actually because there's not enough points, but let me run that again with more points. You can see some interesting patterns coming up with like where the condition number is really high and where it's really low. I think it's very cool to have a play around with, but it's just annoying because the more points we run, the laggier it is. So here it is with a heap more points. I don't know if I'm going to be able to move this around too much. All this code is actually on GitHub. If you look in the description of this video, then you can find the link to the GitHub page where I have stored all of this, so you can have a play around with it yourself. Yeah, it's a bit too laggy. But we can see, if we try to go on the top view. No, that's not happening. All right, too laggy. Yeah, you can see some interesting patterns come up. Yeah, okay, so I got that all working, and I basically tested what are you using to calculate these graphs. I can show you the code. So let me zoom in a bit, maybe not that much. As I said, this is all on GitHub, so please feel free to have a look at this and do whatever you want with it. To calculate these graphs, that's a very big question. We are generating a bunch of poses that fit inside that cone, but to actually create the graph itself, we are using this where we are checking the reachability for all of the poses. We're basically working through all of them and making sure that the thing is reachable. If it is not reachable, then we will make note of this so that later on when it actually comes time to plotting it, we can make it disappear. Yeah, and then if it is reachable, we figure out the score, and so this evaluate Jacobian it is in Python. Yes, everything's in Python. Yeah, this evaluate Jacobian will create the 4 scores that I talked about before, and we can pick which one of these scores we actually care about. And it's interesting to play around with different ones of these. I wish that it was less laggy, so I could show you very rapidly what all of these are, but unfortunately it's not. Yeah, and then just plots. So this is all well and good. All of that we've done so far will basically test a heap of geometries. Actually, sorry, I haven't gone to that bit yet. Sorry, it's been a long week. I've been doing lots and lots of simulating, and I'm getting my head straight with all of this. So what we've talked about so far, we'll do one test. So like it will basically create this plot once it comes up. And this will give us this that we've seen. But really what we care about is, well, what I'm actually trying to do with all of this is to figure out what geometry is best. Where the geometry that we are interested in is changing the radius of the platform, so making that bigger or smaller. And if we reduce the number of points that we are simulating this with, we'll be able to do things a little bit faster. So let's change this to 4. Yeah, so we might want to say, hey, what happens if we set the radius to 50 and we have a really big angle? What's going to happen there? What will this look like? Well, it will look like this, where we have a lot more unreachable poses. And this, okay, actually, I don't want to use that example. I'll talk about that in a sec. Let me do a smaller angle. Yeah, we might have something like this, where and actually this is a good one because we can see very clearly that sort of patterning that I was talking about before, where we can see that if the platform moves in the direction towards the base nodes, it can reach those points, but if it kind of moves in between the base nodes, it can't reach those points. And I find that interesting. Like it can't get over here, but it can get over here. I don't know, it's fun to play around with all these. It's really cool to see what comes up of this. But like, I don't want to be sitting here running this simulation like 1,000 times for all of these different geometries. So I want to see what radius is the best and what angle between the 2 nodes is the best. So I have this section of this script that is the running geometry study. And if you set this to true, then be prepared to wait a couple hours because it will basically step through a whole bunch of radii and angles, and for every single combination of these radii and angles, it will run that same process that I just talked about before, where it sees if it's reachable, it sees what the score is, and then it will log that score, and it ends up making an average. Like it aggregates all of these scores, and it does this. We get means, we get standard deviations, we get all this sort of stuff. If you're interested in the details, you can have a look in the code on GitHub. Yeah, but it does that for a lot of geometries. Guz is asking, the blue dots are linear actuators. What are the other dots representing? Yes, very good question. I probably should have mentioned that. All of the dots kind of up the top in this cone sort of pattern are the poses that we're going to. The purple dots or magenta dots are the nodes of the platform. And the red dots are the nodes of the base, and the blue lines are the linear actuators themselves. Yeah. I probably could have gotten a bit more fancy with setting all this up, but I don't know, it works. Yeah. Cool. So once this big geometry study has run, we end up with a .npy file with all of our results. And I probably could, there's other ways to do this, but this is just what I've done. And this is where things get really, really interesting, I think. So I've got this other script called, let me hide this for a sec, called Analyze Jacobian Results. And in this script, we can pull in the aggregated results, and we get really, really nice looking. Oh, I actually want to, I'll keep it with that, and then I'll show you the fancy one in a sec. So I'm just going to run it again. Oh, you're still open. Cool. Yeah, so we get really pretty looking graphs like this. where we can see what the condition number is, the submatrix condition number, the norm score, and the number of unreachable points. And I love this. It's so good. There's actually a HTML version of this. If you look on the GitHub, then you can get the HTML version of this, and it's so much snappier, so much easier to move things around. But I don't know if I like the spacing of how this is all laid out. So I'm going to stick with the matplotlib one for now, because these are pretty easy to move around. They're fairly fast. And yeah, so here we can see what is happening when we change, for example, the platform radius. As that, let me hide me as well. Come on. As that radius increases, what happens to the norm score? As the angle increases, what happens to the norm score? What happens to the number of points that we can reach as we change these geometries? It's so nice. I love these graphs. But one thing will very clearly stand out to you, which is that these top two have enormous spikes at an angle of around 96 degrees. It's pretty much exactly 96 degrees. And does anyone want to guess what happens at 96 degrees? Well, let's find out. We can go back to our script before and see what is going on at 96 degrees. Oops, 96. It doesn't really matter what the platform radius is, but let's just, for the sake of demonstration, give it in its worst case scenario. This is what we have once it will load. Come on. We have the geometry that I showed before, where all of the legs are perfectly straight up and down. In this geometry, we have a singular orientation, where, as we saw when I showed the video, like from my second YouTube video, this whole thing just falls apart. This is a pretty crap Stewart platform orientation, or like layout. And it's very cool that this comes up in this mega graph that we've got. We can see at around 96 degrees, everything just kind of craps itself. And I've applied a log scale to this data, and still it's like absurdly peaked, which makes it really, really hard to see what else is going on in the lower area. Like without the log 10, it's like literally just flat and then just enormous spikes at those points. I was trying for a while to like plot this so that the data was cropped, but I don't know, I just couldn't get it to work. And yes, I'm a little bit annoyed about that, but that's okay, because I've got another way of looking at this data, which I'll show in just a sec. But yeah, it's interesting as well that like this, there's a weird like little ripple effect going on here, and I don't really know how to describe that. Like around 96, it goes up and then it goes down, and then it just rockets up at exactly 96 itself. I am not sure what is going on there. I think it's just like a numerical instability thing. Like the calculations are just kind of going haywire because the values are so nuts, I think. But in any event, we know that we need to stay away from a platform angle of 96 degrees, irrespective of what the radius is. So I find that quite interesting. Yeah, so from all of these plots, my takeaway is that we want the angle to be as small as possible. The larger the angle is, the closer we get to this kind of craziness. And to be honest, I think I prefer my mean norm score as a way to evaluate these. This has the nicest to interpret graph, I think. Yeah, but my general takeaway is that I want to have an angle as small as possible. But with these surface graphs the way they are, I find it really hard to tell what is actually going on at any given slice. So what I did is I made another function that will plot that slice. So if I close all my other stuff... What? That wasn't the right one. Here we go, yeah. So let me put that there. And we can put this here. So I can pick the angle that I want, say 100 degrees, and this will slice these graphs and then show me what is happening at that slice. And I love this. I find this very, very satisfying to just like move around and have a play around with. Of course, we don't want an angle of 100 degrees, so let's do one with a more sensible angle. Let's do what it currently is, which is 12 degrees. Oh, almost. Yeah, and here we can see what's actually going on here. So even though these two top graphs are massively blown out by the fact that this is like these results up at 96 degrees are really screwing things up, at least in our sliced image, we can actually see what's going on here. So this red line looks completely flat to me at least, but we can actually see that the condition number is 8 times what it is at the lowest at the peak. So this slice makes it a lot easier to actually see what's going on. And yeah, we see an interesting relationship between the radius and the norm score. So remember, like we want these scores, the norm score and the condition number, we want those to be as low as possible. And we also want the number of unreachable poses to be as low as possible. So there's an interesting trade-off here between reaching more poses and having good stability at all of the poses that we can reach. And I'm not fully set on a given geometry yet. There are a couple other considerations that need to be made, which I will talk about in a sec. But yeah, it's not immediately obvious. Like part of what has like indicated to me that this has worked is that there's not an obvious answer. It's not just like, oh, do this. I feel like if I got that result, that would almost be too easy. Like there's always multiple things that you need to keep in mind. And the fact that this has come up with that result, I think is a promising one. Yeah, it's interesting to grab this. So if we say, okay, cool, like an angle of 12 degrees looks good, we can get a fairly low norm score of like 100. I don't know what a good scale for these sorts of things is, so I'm just kind of doing it relative to other points, other like geometries that we could choose. So let's say that we want an angle of 12 degrees and a radius of 50 is the smallest size that I checked. It's interesting to go back to this other simulation and actually see what that looks like. So we have a radius of 50 and an angle of 12. And it's cool to like pull this up and see, okay, what positions can we actually access? And so once we have this, these graphs don't tell us which poses are actually unreachable. It just says, oh yeah, you're going to have like, 600 or so that are going to be unreachable. This is with a different number of points. That was with just to be fully rigorous, let's check that it's actually correct. So this was with 666. So we should find that we have, what was that? 650-ish, 658-ish. And if we run this, we can see, once it loads, 654. Yeah, pretty much 658. This gives further validation to me at least that the simulation seems to be working correctly, although it's like kind of referencing against itself, so maybe not really. But yeah, simulating it, well, showing this in this way, we can see that there's actually a lot of poses that are unreachable that we may want to be able to reach. And because that's super laggy, I'm going to run that again with smaller numbers. And just so that the black dots don't get in the way, I want to hide them. So let's... I can't remember where I've changed that code, so let's just do that. Oh, come on. No. So this is why I don't want to do programming live. I'm definitely not at the confidence level for that yet. But eventually we get there. And we can see these are our poses that we can actually access. So there's a lot that we can access with this geometry that are in this kind of like inside circle. And if we want to do a lot of moving out towards the base nodes, then we can do that as well. But we're not going to be able to do a whole lot of like moving in between the base nodes, which I would like Jugglebot to be as symmetric as possible. So I'm not a huge fan of how this layout has come out. I think I would probably like for this circle that like all of the reachable points are around to be probably a little bit bigger than that. But yeah, I can flick back and forth between these pretty readily and like check what is actually going on in each geometry. And I think it's very, very helpful to be able to do that. So all of this is all well and good. Using this approach, we might say, okay, cool, we want the radius and the angle to be as small as they possibly can be, to have as low of a score as we possibly can get. Remembering that low score is better. Low score is more controllable, easier to work with. But that, of course, has to actually be constructed, has to be made, which gets to our other considerations that we have to keep in mind. So last night I had a quick model in Onshape, and this is what I have come up with as my rough layout of what the platform could look like. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to model the actual platform nodes themselves, so these are all just kind of like hanging out in space, but that shouldn't matter too much. And yeah, we can play around with changing things like the radius. So if we say, okay, I want a really small radius of only 50 millimeters, what does that look like? Well, it actually breaks. Let's try something a bit bigger. 80 millimeter. Oh, that's because that's so high. Let's make that 50. Yeah, so we can see, okay, maybe an 80 millimeter radius is a bit too small. I don't think that this is going to be very structurally sound, so we're probably going to want to go a bit bigger than that. So maybe 150, see how that looks. And then I can play around with this and find a geometry here that will actually make sense. So there's going to be a bit of a process of like flicking back and forth between like Onshape land or CAD land, simulation land, and just like trying to find something that will structurally work as well as be controllable and be like operable. So lots of considerations going on. I think it's worth just mentioning as well the layout that I've come up with here. Well, I shouldn't really say come up with. I have modified from John's design. So this was John's platform proposal that he had, where all of these tubes would be carbon fiber tubes, and this should lead to an extremely robust, stiff platform. My concern with doing things like this, though, is that the way that I have been mounting, well, any way that I can think of mounting carbon fiber tubes into a plastic holder will basically have the tube in its like resting state. It will just kind of be sitting there. Some of these will be under tension just because of gravity. Some of them will be under compression, again, because of gravity. But as the thing moves around, those tension and compression forces will change. Like none of these will be pre-tensioned to have like a very, very high tension or compression value. And in my mind, that means that as the platform moves around, as the hand throws, as things happen, any individual rod or like strut in this structure it seems pretty likely to me that they will be changing between being in tension, being in compression. And that changing tension, compression, tension, compression, tension, compression will mean that where the carbon fiber rod is attached into the printed part will just slowly develop a bit of play. Whereas what I'm thinking of doing here, I have spent a lot of time working with strings and have come up with pretty good ways of like tensioning strings to be extremely tight. So what I'm thinking with this is that these 3 carbon fiber rods, which are like this larger diameter rod, those will be under insane compression and all of the strings will be tightened up extremely tight. So they are all super, super, super tensioned. My hope here is that irrespective of where the platform moves around, that like the direction of those forces will always be the same. The strings will always be in tension and the carbon fiber rods, or tubes rather, will always be in compression. My hope with doing this is that the fatigue will be a lot less and that the whole thing should stay super rigid irrespective of kind of where it's positioned. That's my thinking, at least. Yeah, I don't know if that's really legit. Like it's, I don't know. So my biggest hesitation with this though is that these rods or tubes get a little bit in the way of the ball. Like obviously in this orientation they get a lot in the way of the ball and will actually hit the ball on the way up. So we can change this ball to be a little bit further out. If anyone is familiar with Onshape and knows how to do this properly, I'm changing a variable in my variable table and I wanted to update this thing, but I have to go in here every single time and update it. So frustrating. I wish that would just do it automatically. Yeah, if you know a way to do that, I would love to know. Also, if you want to play around with this, there is a link to the Onshape model in the description of this video, and I would love to know if anyone's watching this right now and wants to give this a test. I'm very curious to know what this looks like if you open it up on your end, if you can play around with it, if you can do slices. It should all be publicly available. You should be able to make a full copy of this model and do whatever you want with it. But I haven't used Onshape enough to really know. This is like my sort of test run for using Onshape for Jogglebot. I think it has I've got high expectations, but yeah. Gurz is saying the Bamboo Labs printers use carbon fiber rod for the gantry system. They epoxy the rod into the holes on the end. Yeah. That's interesting. I don't expect that they would have the rods really having much of any like tension or compression forces though. If those are on the gantry and they're just kind of like moving up and down or like side to side, they would mostly be experiencing bending, which will probably not be acting too much to pull the rod out of its like holster. And I'm very hesitant to epoxy anything or like permanently fix anything. I have had every single prototype that I've made so far, except for the current version of Jogglebot, which is going to change soon, like the platform release will change soon. Everything has been changed, and there have been several times where I've said, oh yeah, this design feels pretty final. I'm in a good spot now to like permanently fix this. Every single time that that's happened, I've regretted it because some weeks or months or whatever later, even days in some cases, I've gone back to it and gone, I don't have enough money or time to buy these parts again. I need these same parts. And now I have to undo my permanent connection. And that gets very, very tedious. You can see on where the light part of that shelf, that's broken because of me hammering something on it and trying to separate things. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of permanent fixings. In the part studio, not the assembly, you can create a function. But I want to edit the function in the assembly. I want all of my functions, all my variables to be here so that I can just quickly, like this. Maybe I should check a bit more closely how this is actually updating, because this is a part that I'm updating automatically. Yeah, I did this very late last night, so I think I might just need to spend a bit more time with it. Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now with the simulating things. There are, however, some very interesting results that I have. Yes, Peter, I don't know why it's upside down. I noticed that this morning. When I first opened this up, I rebooted my computer before the stream and I opened it up and I'm like, oh, that's a bit weird. Why is it upside down? I'll go in and fix that at some point. It was very accidental. Yeah, so there's some interesting results that I have been finding with my simulation here. And I just want to show you one of them. Oh god, come on, stop opening things. Yeah, it's actually the geometry that I showed before as an example. I believe I need these to be 6 to show this properly. So we have a platform angle of 100 degrees, which you'll note is extremely close to the unstable angle of 96 degrees. And I think that's part of why this is happening. But what we find, once this loads, is we have this point cloud where we say, a lot of these points are purple. They're not black. I should probably have changed these colors because, yeah, it's not obvious what's what. But black, there's no black points here. All the black points have been hidden, so don't worry about them. A lot of these points at least are purple. But clearly there is something here. There is some pose here that has a really, really high condition number. There is some pose here where if the platform is at that pose, it will get very, very close to being, well, it will basically be a lot less stable than at all of the other poses here. And so what I've done, and like for right now, it's obviously super hard to like see where that is. You can kind of see a yellow, there it is, but it's very hard to like actually like find. I've actually got that here. So what we can do is we can hide some of the other points, and only we get left with these. And we can see that there's one there that is really high, and even all of these other ones are still a lot lower. So let's actually hide those as well. Let's only have just that really, really high condition number pose. And it's like, what is happening at that pose that makes the platform unstable? That's not really immediately obvious to me just looking at it like that. So I've like found what that pose is, and now we can plot the platform at that pose to get maybe a better idea of what's actually going on there. And this is that platform, well, the platform in that pose. And I don't really know why this is unstable. Like, looking at this, it looks fine. Like, none of the legs are the things that I'm looking for here are like the legs pointing in the same direction. If the two legs are like perfectly parallel to each other, or like pointing, or like collinear with each other, would be even worse. I guess maybe maybe that is it. If we look at it from above, these two, nah, but it's not. Like, I don't know. I've been playing around with this a bit and like testing a couple of these scenarios, and I can't really see why this is unstable. Like, why is that any less stable than like, I don't know, being like somewhere else with the same angle? Like here would have a much lower condition number, or probably would have a much lower condition number based on the clouds, the points that I generated before. I don't know. It's not immediately obvious to me. I think that this is a result of some sort of numerical instability. So we can see from our big plot before, oops, let's actually take a slice at 100 degrees so we can see what this looks like. Put that there. We can see that there's a lot of craziness going on here. And yeah, I think that this is just a numerical instability thing. I don't really know. Yeah, I think if I was putting the mean norm score, a lot of those wacky individual points having a super high condition number would go away because the norm score seems a lot more stable. But I don't really know. It's very odd. Not sure what's going on. But yeah, in any event, it seems pretty accurate. Like, the simulation seems correct. All of the other poses that I've checked with, like, as long as I'm staying away from around 96 degrees, all of the results seem to agree with what like intuition tells me. So that feels good. I just love these graphs. They look so pretty. I'm a big fan of them. Yeah, a couple other things that I want to mention. I spent a very, very, very long time trying to get these plots. Let's do a nicer one. Let's do what it currently is. Oh, I need to do it in a dedicated. Yeah, I spent a super long time trying to get this plot, once it loads, to be plotted in the same way as the HTML plot that I showed before, like this one. Let's bring it here. Because these are super snappy. Like, this is so fast. And I got it to work. It was plotting. And this, by the way, is using Plotly, the plotting, I don't know, library. Yeah, these are really, really snappy and really beautiful in my opinion. Like, it's so satisfying to like zoom really close into them. Let me hide me. I think this is my favorite plot, the unreachable points one. It's just such a nice curve. Oh my god. I've not gotten used to these controls, as you can tell. Yeah, it's such a nice curve. It looks so good. And I was really hoping, and like, it's so snappy, just instant, goes. I was really hoping I'll be able to plot these plots in the same way so that we can just like really quickly snap them around. And I got it to work, but Plotly doesn't have arrows. Instead, it has cones. And the cones follow a completely different way of coloring them than the points do. It's just like, there's no option to just set the color of the cone. It's like inferred based on the orientation that it has, or like the velocity that it has. And it's like, why? Why is there no option to just set the color of the cone? That I spent like literally like hours, many hours being like, no, I give up. That's not going to work. Going back to matplotlib and doing this and being like, no, I can't deal with this lag. This is too much. And I'm like, maybe Plotly will work now. Maybe there was something I was missing. And just so much like back and forth, but no, impossible, can't be done. And yeah, because what I was really trying to do, what I want to make this simulation and like the results of this simulation as easy to use and as nice to use as possible. Because as far as I'm aware, this simulation doesn't exist on the internet. I have spent many hours over the last 3 years trying to find someone who has made this sort of analysis of a Stuart platform available, and I have not been able to find it. And it is was extremely frustrating because I wanted to see what geometry was best. But I had to do it myself, and I didn't understand what to do, so that's why it's taken this long. But my hope is that I think this is still pretty good, but what I really wanted is to have this as easy and clean as possible, so that anyone who is building their own Stuart platform can just load this up and get some nice, quick, snappy, very aesthetically pleasing plots, and be able to like see what geometry they have and like how their geometry performs. I was dreaming too big. But yeah, I don't know. Hopefully at least this will help someone at some point, even though the plots are slow as... Yeah, Sheen Mark, I don't know. But yep. That's where I'm at right now with the simulations. Is we've got a fairly robust platform. Like, I like the word platform as like a launching point sort of thing. It's like a structure that we can use to build off of. But then also I'm using the word platform to describe the Stuart platform, and that gets really confusing. I want like another way to describe like a thing that we can use to go further. But platform gets confusing. But yeah, I've got a very good, like robust structure for running these simulations, and I just need to spend a bit of time going back and forth between Onshape and the simulation and just narrow down a geometry that will work really well. I'm particularly mindful that getting the platform nodes really close together, despite giving us better results, like if those nodes... Actually, let's do the slice. I like the slice plot. This one... Get out of here. I don't want you. Let's say we have an angle of like 5 degrees. Is a very... They're super close together. We can see we have a much lower... Like, I'm going to go off of norm score. I like the norm... Oops. I like the norm score analysis a bit better than the submatrix, or than the condition number. But we can see that the norm score will steadily increase as the platform angle increases. So I think we want the platform angle to be as small as possible, from what I can tell. But we don't want it to be too small because then we start missing points. And we also don't want it to be too... but we don't want the platform radius to be super small at the same time, because then we start missing points and then it becomes really structurally unsound. So to be honest, I'm leaning towards a really tight angle. I need to like redesign come up with what design I want to use for the joints between the platform and the legs. I want to sort that out so that way I can figure out exactly how close together I can get those, because if they get really, really close together, then there's a lot of collisions that happen as the platform moves around. But yeah, I'm leaning towards like a super, super tight angle and a platform radius of around 200 millimeters, which if we look back at, oh, that's exactly what I have right now. So that would be this, which looks decent to me. This looks like all of these angles seem like not too tight. So it seems like this would be fairly strong. Like the nothing, like obviously the hand collides in here, but like that, these rods wouldn't be going inside the tubes. That's fine. This seems fine. This looks like it would be pretty structurally sound. So I think I'm leaning towards that sort of geometry, but yeah, we'll see as I do a little bit more analysis. I also think it's probably worth pointing out that that's actually extremely close to the geometry that I have right now. The geometry I have now is the radius is I think like 230-ish, and the angle is like 12. And I've been trying to think back to why I chose the geometry that I did for this, and I actually can't remember. I have a suspicion it was just because it is what felt good, but I'm not 100% sure. In any event, whatever reason I had before was evidently a pretty good one, because I got pretty close to what I actually really, really want for Jugglebot. So I guess I was a bit lucky there. Guruz is saying foundation. That's a good, yeah, Peter, foundation. I like that. Good foundation to build off of. Guruz, I don't know if stup form. I don't think I'll be able to commit that to memory. Jean-Marc, just take a quick look. Plotly does render via Canvas. Yeah, using WebGL. That makes sense. It really reminds me of the JavaScript plots that I had and have in Jugglebot's GUI, which I don't have open now, but hopefully you remember. It feels very reminiscent of that. And part of me through this process was thinking maybe actually saving my aggregated data not in a numpy matrix, but instead as like a CSV or something, and then I can maybe import that into like a JavaScript code that will plot it using JavaScript, which would be a lot snappier and probably a lot more aesthetically pleasing as well. But I didn't want to overcomplicate things, and I like Python. Python is nice. So yeah, I ended up with this. But I mean, all of the data is there as well. So if you go on GitHub, then you should be able to see like this exact folder, but on GitHub. Can I zoom? I don't know how to zoom this. But yeah, you should be able to see like all of these things in here. And importantly, all of the data is here. So the first results that I did from like a half an hour simulation all the way up to, and you can probably just ignore this to be honest, the aggregated results, even more points, is the one that took like 5 hours and had a ton of points. So I don't know, if you want to try your own hand at plotting those, then by all means, but yeah, I think this works. It's good enough. We've already gone through the interesting results. So yes, update on throw testing as well. I have not done any testing on the throws. That's just a quick answer for this. But the reason for that is because I have been convinced that a real-time operating system on my Jetson is the way to go. So I was thinking for a little while of, just to back up completely, the computer that I'm using to run Jugglebot runs on Linux, but it does not run on a real-time operating system. So processes may take a bit longer than they should, just because they can. There's nothing in there saying you will take this long, and there's like all these background things going on that may make certain things take longer than others. And yeah, these background processes, you can't really control them, and they may be apparent in some situations, and they may be there in others, and they may not be there in other situations, and they just make it makes your certainty about timing things a lot less precise. So what I would want is a real-time operating system, so that every command goes out exactly when it's supposed to go out. And that is really important for controlling the hand now, because we want to be controlling the hand as quickly as we can. That process of getting the ball from stationary to out of the hand, if we're doing a really high throw, will happen on the order of like tens of milliseconds. And we want to be sending as many commands as we can during that time to get that throw profile as close to what we want as possible. This has not been a problem up until now, because the way that I'm controlling the legs, there doesn't need to be anywhere nearly that fast. I'm controlling them at 100 hertz, I believe, from memory. And that's like more than fast enough. If I'm just like zooming the platform around using my space mouse, like 100 hertz is way, way, way fast enough for that. But for the hand to throw the ball, we need much, much, much faster. And because of that speed, we want to be really confident that our commands are going out exactly when they should be going out. So the question is, why not just update the Jetson to a real-time operating system? Which there is one. There's this nice patch. The preempt RT will turn the Jetson into a real-time, or it will make the Jetson run on a real-time operating system. However, I have been very hesitant to do this up until this point, because I'm not very comfortable setting up the Jetson again. I had a friend over, Rodrigo, if you're watching this. I'm still extremely thankful for you. He carried me through the setup process of getting the Jetson working. And Rodrigo is no longer here. God knows where he is now. Last I heard, he was in Hawaii, so he's not going to be too much help for me in Australia. I'm very hesitant to completely tear down the Jetson and then reinitiate it with this the real-time operating system. So I was thinking maybe I can get around this by using a Teensy, where the Teensy is the real-time operating system. Like that Teensies are extremely fast, and they can perform in a real-time way. So, or like they do by default. So I was thinking that I can send my commands from the Jetson, the main computer, over to the Teensy. I can send for the next 100 milliseconds, this is the profile that you need to follow. And then the Teensy will say, okay, cool, thank you. And then it will basically zoom in to that profile and say, okay, for the next 100 seconds, we want to go from here to here, but I'm going to discretize that into like 500 or 1,000 different points, and then send those out really, really, really quickly to the hand. But as John pointed out, this will lead to all sorts of issues with timing between the two systems. If the Teensy is our like ground truth clock, then the Jetson may waver compared to that ground truth clock, and getting those two synced up would be quite a hassle. So that's not really a very viable option. So we're back to get the Jetson to have a real-time operating system. And I've been doing some reading about this, and there was an interesting article here if you are curious. I will put a link to this in the description. It's a good article. I enjoyed it, but I'm a little bit worried about this quote that they had in it, where importantly they say, real-time is the gun to shoot yourself in the foot with. I don't really like that. I don't like having more opportunities to shoot myself in the foot. So, yeah, my nervousness has not been abated by reading about this too much, to be honest. Yeah, I'm still very uncomfortable about this whole process, but I think it's what needs to be done to make Jogglebot fast. If this does work, like once this is working and running, it will be so good being able to send out as many commands as we like from the Jetson within reason, and having them all be exactly timed how we want. Primo. It's going to be good. I've also been wondering how proper robotics, how Boston Dynamics, for example, does the communications within the robot. Because I have heard that they do a lot of their, they do the motor control stuff at 1,000 hertz, and the trajectory control stuff, the updating at 100 hertz, which I would like to mimic as closely as I can with this, particularly for the hand. That's kind of what we're trying to aim for, is around 1,000 hertz, or as fast as possible, really. But I'm so confused how they actually do that. How do they send those messages? Because even right now with Jogglebot, with 7 motors, 6 for the legs and 1 for the hand, there are too many messages going across a single CAN bus for me to fit them all in just on one bus. Like just the legs alone, the 6 legs at 100 hertz is like almost half of my capacity for the CAN bus. If I have the hand going like 500 hertz, that's going to massively overwhelm the bus, and there'll just be too many messages going back and forth. So I'm thinking, even with the Jetson on a real-time operating system, I think we actually might need to have 2 CAN buses, where we've got one just for the hand and one for all of the legs. Maybe. Which will, of course, complicate things a little bit, but to be honest, I actually don't think it should be too bad to do that. Thankfully, the Teensy that I've been using is Teensy 4.0. That has 2 CAN, like you can connect 2 CAN buses into that. So I'm thinking that I can just use that as kind of like the intermediary between the Jetson and the both CAN buses. But yeah, I don't know. Like, how do they have like, I don't know, the humanoid robot must have like 20 axes or something. Like, how in the world do they send that many messages that fast? I would love to know, but I'm sure it's all very hush-hush. I will note as well, actually, that there is a version, there's an improved version of CAN, of like the CAN protocol, that does allow for, I think, double the bandwidth over a single bus. But unfortunately, I cannot use it right now because the O drives haven't updated to be able to use that. Apparently that's like on their radar for a future update, but for now I'm stuck using boring old CAN 2.0. I want the FD, I want that full data frame, baby. Yep. It's been a long week, lots of simulation, lots of so much just tearing my hair out about bloody Plotly not coloring things properly. It was like, gave me so much false hope. Once I got the cones plotted nicely, I was like, oh my god, this will actually work. Like, it's so snappy, I can move things around really quickly. It looks kind of alright, like the arrows are nicer, but the cones, they work. But the colors, my god, the colors. Why is there no option to just set the color of the cone? Boggles my mind. Anyway, that's about where I'm at right now. There's probably some other little things, but whatever, that can wait for the future. Yeah, so I hope you found that interesting. Lots of rambling. Hopefully I was considering doing a working session now where I work on the platform to like change this around and like model the nodes and maybe model the top and bottom bits. But to be honest, I don't really want to do that right now. I want to have a sit down and, I don't know, read a book or something. Have a rest. Too much simulation frustration. All this, like, remembering the Plotly stuff is just frustrating me. It's yep. Anyway, yeah, hope you found that interesting. And yeah, good luck with everything you are doing. Hopefully next week we will have, I don't even know what we'll have. We'll see. We'll see what we have. It'll be good, whatever it is. Some progress will be made. That much I can promise. What direction that progress is in, who knows? Maybe the Jetson won't even be open, like be bootable. We'll see. Hopefully I don't know. We'll see. Alrighty. Cone colors sounds like a nice feature, right? There are so many like things on like the Stack Exchange forums where people are like, how do I set the cone colors? And it's like, you can't. I don't know. Yep. Good luck with everything you're doing. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.